Well, it's Saturday, the 19th of May, 2018, and welcome along to a special edition of your EV News Daily podcast. We like to do this occasionally, where we get a little bit in-depth on certain topics and subjects. And there was something earlier this week that certainly caught everybody's imagination. It was announced on Tuesday earlier this week, and then my newsfeed just filled up with it. And it was certainly something that certainly caught on. We're always being told about how most charging happens at home. People say, don't worry, overnight on cheap rate, that's how everyone will charge. Everything's fine. But clearly, everything isn't fine. EV adoption is varying country to country, but it's fair to say around 2% would be a bit of an average in many countries. So clearly, work needs to be done. And then earlier this week, we heard about the UE1. It's a pop-up on-street charger. But I'll say no more. I'll talk to one of the co-founders of Urban Electric, and we welcome onto the podcast now, Keith Johnston. Hello, Keith.
Hello, Martin. Morning.
Thank you very much for joining us today and telling us a little bit more about the UE1. The best way I can describe this for anyone that hasn't seen the articles, firstly, congratulations on getting so much coverage earlier this week. It's like a pop-up security bollard, but a very smart version of one. That's a very crude way of describing it. This is the UE1. And you're going to install this, you want to install this in streets all around the country, is that right?
So we set out to solve two problems. The first is that on-street charge points, generally speaking, are big and ugly, and they create what the councils call a lot of street clutter. So councils don't really like them, and all the residents having lots of these down the street. The first thing we did was set out to design and engineer a charge point that doesn't detract from the urban environment. Urban spaces is going to be one of the next big things on the agenda, and it already is for councils, if not central government. The second thing is we wanted to specifically address a problem that is really big in the UK, but also across Europe, really, which is that here, 43% of households, which is nearly 12 million households in the UK, don't have a garage or a drive to park on, so they've got nowhere to charge an EV because they park their vehicle on street at night. And in London, that number is up to 85% of households. In Westminster, it's nearly 90%. So it's a really big problem in large cities. And if you think about Europe, even more cars park on the street at night. So it's a big issue. Now, most people that want to buy an EV won't do so unless they have somewhere, firstly, that's convenient, in other words, near their house to fill up at night. And secondly, with the guaranteed availability of a charge point. And thirdly, at a price that's affordable. So what our pop-up charge point does is provides all of these things. So the UE1, first of all, it's an app-operated charge point that uses clever engineering so that it retracts underground when it's not in use, and it only requires a small hole in the ground, only 405 millimeters deep, even though it's full height when in use. So it uses a whole series of actuators to retract it down, a bit like Russian dolls. And that makes it suitable for about 90% of residential streets in the UK. And if you use one of our charge points as a resident, you'll pay just half what you would be paying to fuel an equivalent diesel car. So somewhere in the region of £600 a year for about 8,000 miles a year. And thirdly, the way we've structured it financially is because our customers are actually the local authorities, because they're the people that are responsible for the roads. We provide these UE1 pop-up charge points free to the local authorities, partly funded by existing government grants from the Office for Low Emission Vehicles, whether that's the on-street residential grant or the Go Ultra Low Cities grant or the Neighbourhoods of the Future grant. So it's a win-win for everybody.
So this is the first trial, as it were, is going to be happening in Oxford, a city making a name for itself as a low-emission leader, actually, here in the UK. Plans announced in October last year for the world's first zero-emission zone. Admittedly, only a couple of streets, really. It wasn't a huge deal, but they're moving ahead with it, and they're insistent about reducing that air quality in Oxford, which is fantastic that they're doing that. How did you come to work with them for this first installation?
Yeah, as you've said, Oxford are really one of the most progressive local authorities in the UK with regard to addressing air quality through electric vehicles. And so they've got 3 or 4 projects on the go, of which our project will just be one of them. The way it works for the trial and the way it's going to work in future is that we will install a minimum of 20 pop-up charge points along one side of a residential street. And the reason we're going to do that is we recognise that we need to provide an oversupply of charge points, and that's the only way to give residents the confidence to switch to an EV, because they can feel pretty certain that a charge point is going to be available near their home. The other thing that's different, I guess, to the way it's been done in the past is that you don't need to convert residence parking bays into EV-only bays. There are no restrictions on conventional cars parking in the residence parking zone. So that pleases existing residents as well as those wanting to switch to an EV.
Yeah, I've seen people I follow on Twitter. Some of them don't have home charging and they wear it as a badge of honour that they charge at work, or they find a way around it, but they are real early adopters. And also other people, I've seen one person who's posted pictures outside their house. They said, look, it's really easy. All you've got to do is apply to the council. They'll put some white lines on the road. I paid for an install, like this person on Twitter saying, I paid for an install for a charging point. And you think, for most people, they're never going to do that. I mean, we lived in a house that didn't have a dropped curb, and we could have had one to park in our front garden, talking about, city parking here in the UK, which American listeners would find hilarious. But even then, we never got around to it because it was paperwork and a couple of £100. So this, by oversupply, as you say, this gets round that. Now, I was going to ask about something the Oxford City Council said earlier this week. They're encouraging residents to nominate their street to take part in the project. So does that mean that the winning street will have all 20 of your chargers, or are you going to spread them out a little bit?
Yeah, that's exactly right. There'll be one street that will install all 20 of the chargers in. So it's up to Oxford residents to get voting for their street. If they don't have an EV but really want one, this is probably the best opportunity they'll have for the next few years.
Fantastic. Now, on to the next subject, to the kind of the mechanic. Why we're getting you on the show today, just to get a little bit deeper into the mechanics of it all. There's different solutions out there at the minute, a bit like charging your car. People keep saying to me, who's going to win? Which connector is going to win? And I always say, well, maybe it won't be a VHS Betamax. Maybe there'll be a blended solution. Maybe it will be some CCS and some CHAdeMO. And so when it comes to charging, there is a similar thing that we've seen on the Fully Charged videos and read about, which is the Ubitricity, the lamppost conversions. The downside, you could say, to that is that you need to park near the lamppost or have very long leads running from them. But I'm not talking them down. It's a great solution. But you are going to use a similar or the same cable. It kind of has a box halfway along the cable that looks after the billing and stuff like that. Is that right? Tell us more about that.
Yeah, that's right. What Ubitricity have done is very clever. They've taken the metering out of the charge point and put it into the charging cable. So that makes each charge point much cheaper. So we're going to use Ubitricity's smart cable. We're actually partnering with Ubitricity to do that. And we're using their back office billing system as well. You buy one smart cable, which is cheaper than it would cost to buy and install a charge point in your garage or drive. You buy that one cable, and then you'll be able to use that both at any UE1 pop-up charge point, but also at any Ubitricity lamppost. What we want to do, in effect, is to create a new standard for residential charging.
How will it work? So we pull up outside, or we park on street, and then it's controlled by an app. Now, does the charger pop up by itself? Is it a manual thing? Is it motorized?
Again, we've designed to make it simple and easy to use. So you drive up to any of the parking spaces. As you say, you press a button on the app and the charge point comes up out of the ground. You simply plug in your charging cable into the pop-up charge point and the electric vehicle charges. And when you return to your car, you simply unplug the cable and the charge point automatically retracts into the ground. And you build each month for the electricity you use, because it's the same smart cable. You can then be parked at any of our places, UE1 pop-ups or any of Ubitricity's lampposts.
That's very cool.
So what I've been asked a lot recently is how quickly do they charge? The UE1 charges at up to 5.8 kilowatts, which is about twice as fast as it would charge normally at home. So a typical EV is going to charge in about 5 to 6 hours if it needs a full charge. So, just like your mobile phone, you simply plug in when you get home in the evening. And the great thing is then you've got a full tank every morning when you leave.
Here's something that a criticism that from newspapers to individuals will levy at EV owners. They'll say, 20 of these in one street, you'll plug in at once. I can't put my kettle on because you've blown the fuse in the street. How do we get around everybody plugging their car in at once to your chargers?
Yeah, this is one of those urban myths, really, that's developed in the media in recent months. The National Grid and the DNOs recognise that the grid has capacity and has flexibility. So until we get to 1 or 2 million cars on the road, it's not a problem. But we do need to plan for the future. So the UE1 is smart grid capable. In other words, you'll be able to, depending on the type of car you have or the type of energy system you have, you'll be able to, for example, take advantage of delayed time of use charging. So you can program not to start charging until electricity is cheaper, for example, between midnight and 6 a.m. We've also designed the UE1 such that it is V2G friendly. So one of the next big things that's coming down the line, of course, is vehicle to grid. The idea being that you can use your electric vehicle as an energy storage solution and then sell surplus energy from your car back to the grid. And therefore, early trials in Europe suggest that something like €1,200 a year could be generated if you use your car cleverly in that way, and you don't need to have a full tank every morning yourself. So typically in the UK, it could mean that you could halve the price you pay for your electricity. In other words, you could be paying between somewhere around a quarter of what you currently pay to fuel your car if you take advantage of V2G in future. I
do want to touch on, so you and your co-founder, who is Olivier, in Urban Electric and working with your other partners as well, you've got, how should we put this? You've got form. You bring some experience to the EV space. So all of those G-Whiz cars that we see, I see loads of them still in London, by the way, because I work in Soho in London, but you see them all over the place. You would be responsible for those as well. So you've been doing this a while.
Yes, I got involved in electric vehicles in 2003, and I was MD of a startup called Going Green then, and we were the guys that brought the G-Whiz into London. So we put 1,000 of those onto the streets of London over a 5-year period until about 2008. And I guess was the first commercial sign that EVs were possible. It was a hell of an adventure, and that's a whole nother interview, I think, about the stories of those days.
I still see loads of them parked front in to the curb here in London, so they're still very popular. But it's good to know loads of experience behind the Urban Electric UE1. Oh, very finally, by the way, you're doing with this with the help of Innovate UK, which I've read a little bit about, but it seems to be another progressive sign that people are investing some money into ideas and let's make things happen. Tell us just a little bit about Innovate UK. I know you don't speak on behalf of them, but about your kind of partnership with them.
Yeah, the government is being very clever now, and they've learned a lot of lessons from the past. So the way they're funding startups and innovative ideas is increasingly through competitions rather than just grants. And so we participated in an infrastructure competition and were awarded £475,000 towards the £600,000 cost of the 13-month trial with Oxford. We've also been lucky. We're one of 6 startups that's being supported by Climate Kick, which is the European Union's innovation agency. So they've also provided us with some funding and access to Imperial College London, who give us some mentoring, and they also have great connections both in the UK and abroad. So yes, the UK government recognises that the automotive industry is very important here in the UK and is doing more than most governments around the world to incentivise innovation and support the industry.
Well, thank you for your time. We'll put in the show notes a couple of links for people to find out more. The Electrive article, so people actually see the UE1 for themselves, and a link to the Oxford government website as well. If you're an Oxford listener and you want to nominate your streets, then come on, get involved. And Keith, what's the next step for you guys? What's on the near horizon? What's the next thing that you have to do?
We've got a strategy we call colonisation, which is we really want to speak to the 22-23 London boroughs and start to work with them in London to get this solution out there over the next year or two.
And like all brilliant ideas, I find myself sitting here thinking, why didn't I think of this? This is such a good idea. But I guess that's like with all brilliant ideas, it seems obvious once you hear about it. Keith, thank you so much for your time today.
Pleasure. Thanks, Martin.
Well, that was a real treat. Thank you for joining us on the podcast. Normal service resumed tomorrow, by the way, with your news updates. It'll be a double one as well because we missed today. So I imagine lots going on. In the meantime, help me spread the word about electric cars. If you can, why not share this with at least one person who might be interested? And if you're interested in every previous episode of the podcast, or just the ones that you might want to look out for with the things that interest you, check out iTunes or Google Play or Spotify or YouTube or TuneIn or Stitcher or SoundCloud, and the blog at evnewsdaily.com. If you subscribe, well now, you get them first and free and automatically, and you can catch up with us on our socials, Facebook, LinkedIn and Twitter. Just search EV News Daily. Have a wonderful day, And I'll catch you tomorrow.